hey, babe, I had this idea. And she just looks at me and she goes, oh my God, here we go again. And you're dreaming about what you're going to be when you grow up. Never, ever, 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 ever in the history of all humankind did any 12-year-old little boy or girl lay in bed at night dreaming of being a homeless, crack addict, prostitute. Never happened. And then there's Genesis chapter 2, verse 15. And then the Lord God took the man, settled him in the Garden of Eden to cultivate and care for it. And this really and truly is the foundation of everything that we do out here in the village. It's one, trying to settle people. Two, help them rediscover their gifts and talents so that they can cultivate with those gifts and talents. And when they're settled and they're cultivating, leveraging those gifts and talents, they begin to care for something outside themselves. My name is Alan Graham, and I'm the founder and CEO of Mobile Loaves and Fishes, founded in 1998 by myself from an idea that I had in my head. But there are 5 other co-founders with me that joined me ultimately in this vision. And the vision really kind of began back in the 1980s when my wife and I started having children. She started taking the kids back to church. And I had 5 children, and at the time there were probably a couple of them on the ground. Both my wife and I are 7-day-a-week workaholic types. So it was not unusual on a Sunday for me to get, read the paper and then get up and shower and go into the office to do some work to get ready for the week ahead of us. And one day I'm sitting in the easy chair, and there she is. Door opens up, and she and a couple of the young kids are headed out the door to go to church. And at that point, it looked to me like the train was leaving the station, and I wasn't on that train. So I made a decision at that point in time that I'm gonna go back to church. And if I am, I'm one of these guys that kind of goes in pretty deep. I want to understand why I'm doing this. And so I just started reading about my faith. I'm Roman Catholic, and I grew up that way, but wasn't catechized very well. And I started studying the church and fell in love with kind of what I call the train wreck of Christianity. I fell in love with the heresies, the schisms, the Reformations, and it was just a 2,000-year drama that continues to unfold that enamored me. And for me and my faith, I ended up developing a very intellectual relationship with Jesus. And then in 1996, I was invited to go on a men's retreat where had I known that men were going to hold hands with each other and hug it out and pray, I would have never gone on that journey. But here I am in the middle of this deal, and they're doing all those things. And initially, I'm extremely uncomfortable. But over the course of about 30 hours, something profound and revelatory happened, in this intellectual relationship that I had up here literally dropped the floor into the depths of the cave of my heart. And it was a game changer. And at that point, Jialu, I just began to, God, what do you want me to do? I mean, and I had a successful real estate development career going on at the time. And so, I started doing things at church, no big deal, one thing after another, diving in and doing that. And then in 1998, my wife and I were having coffee with a girlfriend, and she was telling us about this ministry in Corpus Christi, Texas, where on cold winter nights, multiple churches would come together, pool their abundance to take out to the men and women that were on the streets of Corpus Christi who lacked that abundance. And at that moment, out of my subconscious mind, came the image of this catering truck as a distribution vehicle from those of us that have abundance to those that lack. And as a serial entrepreneur, that idea would not leave my brain. I thought I was onto something, and in a week or two, I shared it with my wife. I said, "Hey, babe, I have this idea," and she just looks at me and she goes, "Oh my God, here we go again," because she's married to an entrepreneur, and so really, that's what happened. We started going out on the streets, feeding these men and women, fell in love with them, and here I am, nearly a quarter century later, on top of what we believe is a pretty big movement moving throughout the United States called Community First.
When you started the truck food services, one thing that you said was really striking, and you said you want to be on the same side of the truck as the person who you serve the food to. Can you tell us why that's important?
Well, we didn't know it at the time, but there were really three things about that truck that in retrospect turned out to be extremely powerful. Number one is that the truck went to where the people are. We didn't herd them to a soup kitchen. That's not an anti-soup kitchen comment. It's just that we try to centralize and consolidate and economize everything, and it takes the humanity out of humans. And then the second thing is that we never put leftover stuff on the truck. It was always fresh, store-bought food, and it was abundant, and it allowed people to make a choice, which was beautiful. And again, if you go to the soup kitchen, you're going to get whatever the food unit is that day. And then the third thing, the important one that you related to, is that those of us that were serving and those being served were on the same side of the serving counter, which required a one-on-one, human-to-human, heart-to-heart connection. And that's when I could go up and go, "Hey, my name is Alan," and somebody would say, "Hey, my name is Beverly." And next thing you know, it's Alan and Beverly, not the food unit thing. And so food became the conduit to connect you and I heart to heart. And as all of us know, food turns out to be really the number one way that you and I connect human to human, heart to heart. That table turns out to be very important to us.
You mentioned the word dignity a lot. And then that's something that I don't usually hear when I talk with, say, policymakers or academics who do research in this. So can you tell us a little bit about dignity and why that is important?
Well, inherent in each one of us at the moment that we are created, and clearly I believe that we are created by God, but however one believes, there are two innate qualities in us. Every one of us desires to be fully and wholly loved. You desire to be loved by your parents. You desire to be loved by your siblings and your grandparents. You desire to be loved by your partner. It's just very important. And then the second thing is that each of us desires to be fully and wholly known, to be valued for who we are and the gifts that we can bring into the world. And it's really from that the dignity of the human person can manifest. And it really begins with being fully and wholly loved and cared for. And if we just treat people transactionally, and that's what policy does, because I can't make you love me. I can make you maybe not treat me deferentially, like if I'm a black person or a brown person or a gay person or something else, but I can't make you love me. And so policy can only go so far in the world, but policy cannot create and demand dignity for people.
Thank you for that. I totally agree with you. And also I feel a lot of times we use the term housing first, as if as long as we have a house, we put people in the apartment, then our job is done. And then the success defined there was, hey, they stay housed, as if that's a success. I feel like, well, there are many other things we haven't achieved yet, such as, whether the person is respecting themselves. And then I feel that's something that your community first, under this belief is really delivering. Can you tell us a little bit about the difference between the housing first versus your community first?
Well, if you really want to understand homelessness, you first have to understand what home is. And I will tell you that there's an attempt right now in the system to change the language from a homeless person to a houseless person. And we reject that change. This is really about being homeless. And I believe, and in the book Beyond Homelessness, Christian Faith and a Culture of Displacement, published in 2008 by a couple of theologian guys, they talk about the phenomenology of home. And within the phenomenology of home are 8 characteristics of home. 1, home is the place of permanence. 2, home is a dwelling place. It's that place that when I cross over the threshold, it's as if I liquefy and move into every nook and cranny of the home. Home is a place of embodied inhabitation. If you come into my office, you can see lots of things around on the wall that embody who I am as an individual. You come to my home and you can see the embodiment of my family over the past 35, 40 years that my wife and I have been together, including we still have the thing on the wall that you would measure the kids as they grow up. And you know what they do now? They measure me because I shrink, and they laugh, at my shrinking. And then home is a place of hospitality. When you invite someone into your home, you unfold hospitality. Home is a place of safety and refuge. I tell people that the home that I raised my family in for 34 years, nobody had a key to that home. It was never locked. We lived in a community and in a place where we felt safe and secure. Home is a place of stories and memories, and it's often said that the mortar that holds the bricks of even the most impoverished homes together are the stories and memories that flow from that home. Home is a place of orientation, and no matter where I've been in the world, and I've been in some pretty cool places around the world, my compass is always oriented to Austin, Texas, and where I live. And then last and not least, and very important, home is a place of affiliation and belonging. And it turns out that you and I like to be around people that are a lot like you and I. So already I can tell that you're of Asian descent. If I found out what your religious or non-religious beliefs were, if I discovered what your political beliefs were, I know that you're a PhD, and so you're in an economic place. I could describe a lot about who your friends are, the close ones, okay? And they're going to be a lot like you are. That doesn't mean that we don't have relationships with people that are outside of who we are. We do, but that core group of people are going to be a lot like you are. And notice that in none of those 8 characteristics does it have anything to do with 4 walls and a roof. And so that should be number 1. And it doesn't mean we don't need shelter. We do. But if all we do is take somebody out of an environment of being homeless, of being mentally ill, physically ill, a drug addict, despised, outcast, and then try to stick them into an apartment complex full of upper income PhDs that teach at Stanford. It's not going to work out very well, and that is the failure of Housing First. Now, we're not a disbeliever in Housing First. We're just a disbeliever that there's only one way to mitigate this pandemic, and that's where we struggle with that.
Thank you for saying that. I mean, I totally agree. I feel like Housing First should be in combination with the supportive system, such as family and community and other relationships.
Yeah.
So that's why I really like your philosophy. And then also last time when we chatted, I remember you said something about, the family breaking down, which is at the root cause of homelessness. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, as we journeyed along in my journey, my quarter century journey with my friends from the streets, began to sleep with them and hang out with them and then lift them up off the streets. One common denominator began to flow out of that, and that was that they all, almost without exception, came from traumatically broken, catastrophically broken families, and that there wasn't a forged family around them in order to pick up the pieces, to be that fundamental safety net. And it really begins in the womb. And if you were born into a family that was smoking crack while you were being nourished, and then you were born and you weren't wanted, it becomes pretty incredible. And then we took on that belief, but as our quarter century journey began to unfold on us, there was also a lot of research being done in academic institutions around trauma-informed care, adverse childhood experiences that were moving the needle into understanding how important the early years of our life are. And then last year, a beautiful book was written by Oprah Winfrey and Bruce Perry called "What Happened to You?" And Bruce Perry is a PhD, MD, neuroscientist guy, a brilliant guy, and obviously everybody knows Oprah, but she also came from a catastrophically broken family background, was molested as a kid, was beat, as a kid, was unwanted by her biological mom and dad, and struggled through all that. And reading this book, you realize that, humans, as we've evolved on the evolutionary timeline, the anthropological timeline, we were always raised in these 100 to 150 unit tribes or clans or what have you. And typically, there were 4 adults for every 1 child within these clans. And today we celebrate when we can afford daycare for our children, where there is 1 adult for 4 children. And so from 4 to 1 to 1 to 4 is a 16th of the care. And so this is what we're doing societally here in America, and I believe it's propagating throughout the world. The more westernized the world becomes, the more we witness that deal, and this is not good for the human family. And so our whole goal really is to try to help build up a forged family that cares about each and every member of the family, no matter what they're doing and how they're behaving.
You just mentioned in the past it was 4 to 1. grown up to child ratio, and then now is 1 to 4. I mean, my kid, they're 5 and 7. And so they were in daycare not long ago. And if you can get into a daycare with 1 to 4 ratio, that's pretty good.
Yeah, no,
you should be very happy about it.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, and then I do think, there might be some kind of relationship between that kind of a longing for attention, right? Children just want your attention. And when they don't get it, I don't know what kind of long-term effect that's going to have on them when they grow up.
Yeah, well, in a lot of ways, you're able to mask this human tragedy that's unfolding because you are part of a class that can afford, say, a 1 to 4 or something in that range because of where you are economically. I'm sure you and your husband do relatively well, so people like us can go and afford that. But if you live in poverty, you're not buying that 1 to 4 or 1 to 5 or 1 to 7 or whatever it is. You're stuffing them in a 1 to 12, 1 to 15 type of a deal, if you can even afford that. Sometimes you're leaving them alone where it's zero because the mother, a single mom's got to go off and work and just leave the kid at home alone. So
right, with a TV or with some kind of electronic babysitter, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I also see you said something about we need to break down the stereotypes of other human beings who may not be perfect, who may cause trouble sometimes. And so how can you tell us a little bit about that and how that's very important in your community?
Well, we have 5 corporate goals at Mobile Ocean Fishes, and goal number 1 is to transform the paradigm as to how people view the stereotypes of the homeless. And when that goal was set out there, it was really to transform, because people believe that the homeless are lazy, that they've chosen that lifestyle, that they choose to do dope and alcohol, and if they would just go get mental health help, they could get out of that problem, or they could just go get a job, they wouldn't have that problem. And that was kind of my motivation at the time. Now, it turns out that in the homeless population, you got a lot more than just those stereotypes to transform. You got African Americans that are in there. You've got white people in there. You got Christian, Jews, Zoroastrian, Buddhists, Hindus, in that community. You got Asians in the community. You've got gender identity people and transgendered and you name it, you got it in there. But they're all humans. And what I've discovered, and this is how I like to describe it, that when you go back to when you were 12 years old, all of us, every human, and you're laying in bed at night, and you're in that twilight zone from being awake to being asleep, and you're looking out the window at the starry, starry nights, and you're dreaming about what you're going to be when you grow up. Never, ever, 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 ever in the history of all humankind did any 12-year-old little boy or girl lay in bed at night dreaming of being a homeless, crack addict, prostitute. Never happened. We were all dreaming about being rock stars, football players, jet fighter pilots. That was my deal, those 3 things. I don't know what you were dreaming about when you were little. Huh?
I wanted to be a zookeeper when I was young.
Well,
it didn't work out.
Yeah, and my bet is that you had a mom and dad and a family unit that was pouring fuel on those embers of dreams that you had. And then at some point in time, you decided, that call it a different track, whatever track you ended up on that allowed you to ultimately become, a PhD in the work that you're that you're doing right now. But we were surrounded by people that were pouring fuel on those little embers. And I'll guarantee you, there's still a zookeeper thing in you. Even to this day, whatever it was that inspired you then, inspires you today. And I'm not a rock star. I'm not an NFL football player, and I'll never fly an F-22 Raptor. But when a great rock song comes on, I'm on that stage with that guitar in hand. Or when a great football, or when a jet goes screaming across the sky, I see myself still at nearly 66 years old, flying that jet. I know I never will, but those embers are still alive. And for me, what we want to do is capture those dreams and these men and women that are out there, pour fuel on them to see where those dreams can lead to today. And what I find are potential Van Goghs, beautiful artists. I've got art all over my walls that are painted by men and women that live in this community. Beautiful, very fine art. Van Gogh, by the way, happened to be mentally ill, probably an addict, and one of the greatest artists of all time, history. Committed suicide, had a brother that loved him and cared for him. And so, what we try to do is help people rediscover a purpose in their lives so that they can be fully and wholly known the way that you and I are.
I really love you mentioned purpose and goal, and we all need that, right? Even normal people like me, once in a while I'll be like kind of depressed. I'm like, what's the meaning? Why am I doing this, right? I feel like we always need to have have our head straight and really understand what our purposes are. And I really am interested in hearing your thoughts on, because you said, in your community, you kind of help people rediscover their dreams, their purpose, their meaning of life. How do you do that, right? Like, for example, like someone who may have experienced the trauma and became homeless and sort of giving up on their life. How do you manage to bring them back?
Well, it's not an easy task, and there's a lot of distrust from men and women that have been on the streets for quite a long time, and it takes a varying degree of time depending on the individual. Some might acclimate pretty quickly into our community environment because it's a community of accountability. You can't do anything in here. Everybody's watching. We're a pretty tight-knit little community. And for some people, it might take years. I mean, if you've been smoking crack for 40 years, you're just not going to stop. And so we just try to get people to mitigate these things that were exacerbating the problems in their lives a little bit at a time, so that maybe a few years down the road, they no longer have to squelch their past trauma and pain by doing things like crack or meth or heroin or something like that, alcohol.
So you said, this is from Genesis, you quoted in your video, the Lord God took the man and settled him in the Garden of Eden to cultivate it and take care of it. And can you tell us the meaning of that to your community?
Yeah, and there's a little bit longer meaning to that. I'm going to give you the little bit longer. If you back up a little bit in Genesis chapter 2, and God had just created everything, and it was very good what He created. But then the land was barren. There was no grass, there were no trees, there were no field shrubs, there was no water to nourish the land. But suddenly, up out of the ground, a bubbling brook started to come out, and the grass began to grow, and the trees were happening, and God needed somebody to tend it. So he reached out of the heavens and dug into the ground and grabbed a clump of clay and began to go in and mold who you are. And I love the contrast between you on this Zoom call and me. I'm a Northern European bald guy, and you're this beautiful Asian with, you've got, the Asian characteristics. And it's clear that we're similar as humans, but they're the nuances and the beauty of the differences of who we are. And if you can metaphorically envision God molding you, touching you, and then creating this inanimate object that looks like you, but then he needs to come in Genesis chapter 2 and breathe life into your nostrils. Now, if I'm to come in and breathe life into your nostrils, I just can't blow from here. I got to go all the way in. And so what God was doing in the molding and the breathing of the life was mirroring for us what we need to do for others. And so your partner, your husband, your two children, there's a deep level of intimacy in those relationships. And you're molding and breathing life into them every single day. And then God has this Garden of Eden. And in the Garden of Eden now is all the fruit and nut bearing trees, the animals that are good to look at, that provide you and I companionship, some of them are tasty to eat. And in the middle of the Garden of Eden is the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And into the garden from the east flows a river. And the moment that the river penetrates the garden, and it divides into 4 branches, 4 nourishing veins, 4 capillaries that are bringing water to the entire garden. And along one of those, called the Pishon, there is gold. And the gold of that land is excellent. And also there is bdellium and lapis lazuli. And I laugh at this because, God put a jewelry store in the middle of the Garden of Eden. And why? And because of this lavish abundance for you and I. And then there's Genesis chapter 2, verse 15. And then the Lord God took the man, settled him in the Garden of Eden to cultivate and care for it. And this really and truly is the foundation of everything that we do out here in the village. It's 1, trying to settle people, 2, help them rediscover their gifts and talents so that they can cultivate with those gifts and talents. And when they're settled and they're cultivating, leveraging those gifts and talents, they begin to care for something outside themselves. So if you take the birth of your children, how dependent were they on you? Completely dependent in everything. They needed to suckle at your breast. They needed somebody to change their diapers. They needed somebody to cuddle and nurture. And the older they become, the more independent of those things they can become, until at some point in time, they're doing all of those things for someone else. And that's the care part of that deal. And that's what we're trying to mirror. So God wants us to mirror the intimacy of molding, the intimacy of breathing life. And that means sometimes breathing life into people that may not be doing what we want them to do. Like, I hope that you raising your children are seamless. I doubt it will be. I had 5 children. It was a great run. but there was some pot smoking and that alcohol, things going on when they got a little older that wasn't what I wanted them to do at that age. So yeah.
I love your analogy. I mean, you using the term of breathing the air into to someone who may not be completely perfect, but the point is care for someone who is not ourselves.
Yeah.
And I feel that's something I really deeply believe that's something missing in our society today. Everything is in such a hustle. We're always hustling for something, and I don't even know what we're hustling for. As you said, it's transactional. A lot of things are transactional. We don't go to church anymore. We don't have community. I mean, we have some, but not as tight-knit communities as in the past. So I was going to ask you about, do you know any reasons why today, not just in the US, but around the world, communities are not as tight-knit as in, say, 50s or 60s?
Well, there are cultures in the world still that have pretty profound family values. I would say that, particularly Latins and Asians, but you can see like in China, you can see the diminution of those values over time, but in other Asian countries, no, you see a very profound, set of family values. I would say for America, which I can speak on behalf of, I could just look into other cultures and admire or not admire those things. But in America, we have this extraordinary Constitution of the United States of America that I think is one of the greatest documents ever written. But in there are the rights, the inherent rights of the individual. And I have witnessed both historically and then over my lifetime an increase in the recognition of the individual's rights that is causing a negative collateral impact on the rights of the community. And I think over time, in a very insidious way, that's been building to the point where now many of these constitutional individual court agreed to rights are now having a negative impact on our community life. And so it's complex. And then, when you think about our anthropological evolution, that for the overwhelming vast majority of all of mankind, we were always located in coastal areas because that's where the food is. Because we could go out, we could fish. And if 200 years ago, I went out and had a great catch of fish, my only choice was to share that abundance with the community. And then not that long ago, about 100 years-ish ago, was the advent of refrigeration. And now I could catch all that fish and hoard it for a long period of time. I didn't have to share it with you any longer. And then air conditioning came along. And then the automobile came along. And then we built these, what I call hermetically sealed single-family sarcophaguses that we call the American dream, the home, that have everything in them: air conditioning, refrigeration, the internet spewing in, the backyards with 8-foot tall privacy fences with swimming pools, sport courts, and barbecue pits. And our front porches went from being these giant things to nothing bigger than an iPhone 6 Plus. No front porch, just these backyards, and we just keep moving away from each other and isolating within our own little self. And now we get to pick up this thing, and I get to yell at you on this, and how terrible you are, this person. And I don't know. This is not good for our community. And I hope we figure this all out, because it's going to hurt us.
I totally agree. I feel, all the things that you have mentioned are factors that kind of feeds into the breaking down of, I call it social fabric. And also on top of that, we do have the new technology, iPhone and social media, which are all blessings that I'm really grateful for their invention. But at the same time, I do feel we're sort of too engrossed in them. And then oftentimes we're just looking at our iPhone instead of chatting with our friends or family members.
Yeah.
And I think that's extraordinary that our society is in such a way we're all in our own little world without talking to each other.
Yeah, now in a lot of ways we're being manipulated in our thoughts. So, the social media channels and Facebook and these things are feeding the stuff that they want to feed us. So if they see me searching for a particular philosophical thing, next thing you know, they're just dumping that stuff my way. I don't know, man. It's
right.
Yeah.
I also want to ask you about your thoughts. So yesterday, well, I think it's 2 days ago, New York City opened up their first supervised drug injection sites. And so to me, I don't know, I have very mixed feelings about it. Even though doctors say, well, it's going to be better for the patients, but at the same time, at some level, I just feel maybe that's going to promote, the drug use or something like that. So I'm just curious about your thoughts on that.
Well, there was a book published in 2015 called Chasing the Scream, SCREAM, scream like yelling, chasing the scream, the beginning and the end of the 100-year war on drugs. I didn't find the book to be the greatest book ever, but chapters 12 and 13 are absolutely compelling. And in that deal, they followed the research of a brilliant young psychologist back in the 1970s named Bruce Armstrong, I believe. I think that's the name. From the University of Toronto. And the drug wars were always built around these experiments with these rats, where they would put a rat, in a cage, and they would give the rat the opportunity to drink fresh water or drink water laced with opiate or cocaine or something like that. And over the course of about 60 days, the rat would increase its consumption of the drugged water to about 25 milligrams a day, and almost always die within the 60 days. And this guy said, time out on this. We're going to try something different. And they created a rat park where there were lots of rats. There were rat trails, there were rat wheels, there were rat balls to play with, there were rat friends, there were rats to have sex with, there were rat babies. And they had the water and the drug water, and the maximum consumption of the drug water, which for the individual rat was 25 milligrams a day, in the community of rats dropped to 5 milligrams a day. And nobody ever died in the deal. And to me, it was compelling to understand that if we bring people into community and we care for them, and within our village here, our little experiments, and we are not a there's not been a blind study, longitudinal anything done in our deal, but we've done some statistically valid research that suggests that there's an 80% drop in drug use from the streets to the village, and a 60% drop in alcohol use. Now, I can tell you that if you're used to drinking a half a gallon of vodka a day and you go to a quarter of a gallon, you still got a problem. But I believe that when we look at what humans really need, and then begin to look at what can we do with policy that will aid what the humans actually need. And so I think there's value to a legalization philosophy, but it's got to be within the boundaries of community. And so without the boundaries of community, I'm not sure what kind of results that we're going to see. Now, I'll tell you that in Switzerland and Portugal, 10, 15 years ago, and that's in this book as well, they legalized drugs and made it available, and drug arrests, drug incarcerations, drug overdoses leading to death dropped to virtually zero. So I don't know, man. It's complex. I can tell you more than anything, we need people to love and care for us and fully and wholly know us.
I really love that. I feel what you said and just now about we need the community, and we need to bring the dreams back to the people, right? We need to sort of help them rediscover their purpose. And then so that's something that only a community and your family and your friends can bring to you. And I feel it's not, we're not going to achieve that just by doing something like scientific experiment or setting up a site. I mean, that's just my opinion, but we'll see.
I agree. So, yeah.
So I want to switch gear to ask you a little bit about your amazing community. So, I mean, if you don't mind of sharing some numbers with us, because we know, maybe you can just tell us how many people are currently housed in your community, and what kind of situation they're in, like how much money did you spend to build the community and how much you need to keep it running. I mean, the reason I ask that is we know how much money we're spending in California. Everybody thinks it's a crazy amount. And I just want to know, how other people are doing.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you that right now I'm looking at the numbers. We have 312 people living in the community. That number grows about 10 a month. It grows. To build our community, and we're on phase 1 and 2. And when we're done with phase 1 and 2, building all the housing, which will be about 540 homes, building all the buildings to support the farming, the movie theater, all the things that we have here, the average cost per home will be under $80,000 per unit for everything. And that will be housing about 540 people. And so that's on the capital cost. On the operating cost, 100% of the men and women that will move into this community will have to be subsidized for life. The average income coming in is probably $800 a month. Same average income that you have in California. It's an SSI, SSDI income. That's a federal deal. And so that subsidy for us costs currently about $19,000 a year per person, or $54 per day per person, for them to live in this community. And so currently, in our operating budget, about 25% of all of our revenue comes from people paying rents and a little other income, other income kind of a thing. About 15% comes from rents, 10% comes from kind of some other income sources that we have. And then 75% must be raised philanthropically. Okay. And we believe as we scale, because we're going to add another 1,400 homes to this, that subsidy will drop to maybe close to $10,000 a year per person, and about $24 per day per person.
So why will the subsidies drop?
Well, when you scale, there's scaling, and then if you do it right, there's an economy to scaling. And so I'm the CEO, I'm the highest paid employee and here, but you only need one CEO. And so there will be some economies that we will achieve over time as we scale, and that's what we believe will happen in our modeling.
I guess I was probably confused just now when you said, because I was thinking each person, they receive like an $800 SSI, right? About that. Right. And so they could, so would they keep it, or would they give that to you?
Well, they pay rent with that.
Rent, right.
So there's going to be a rent structure. We're way under any kind of remote market rent. I mean, you could rent something as low as $225 a month, all bills paid here.
Right.
And so, but then they get to keep the rest of their money. So.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So when I guess I wasn't sure about what the subsidies. So is the subsidy something you give them or they give you?
Well, you just can't, with them paying $200 or $300 or $500 a month, depending on what their rent structure, you can't operate a village like this on those type of rents. That's where the subsidy market rate for these rents should probably be 3 times or more what we currently rent to people.
Oh, so when you say subsidy, it's more the money comes from the community pot that's going to be paid into the running of the community, keep everything running and perfect. But then you need to raise money, right? You need to keep that pot.
That's correct.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. So that pot to run this, 25% of it could come from rent and other income, and 75% of it will come philanthropically.
Got it. And then you said it's I think I was taking notes. So currently it would be $54 per day, right? So basically we need to provide the individual about $54 a day to keep everything running.
Yeah, well, it wouldn't go to the individual, that would go to us.
Right. Yeah. Just right. Like, if you calculate it that way. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And so if you take $800 of their month, they got their monthly income of 800, and then you say, let's just use the round number of $50 a day times 30 days in the year, that would be another $1,500. So in essence, that's $2,200 a month, which is still under the individual poverty level in Austin, Texas, for sure, and without a question, because of the cost of living in California, the individual poverty level, I bet it's 35, 40,000 bucks a year.
I see. Yes. I mean, I feel you guys are doing it at a much lower cost than what California is spending. So I'm also curious about, so you said, 75% is from donation. Do you receive any government funding or mostly just the donation?
It's mostly just the donations, especially on operating. But recently on our capital side through the American Rescue Funds, we're getting a very significant amount of money to build the next couple of phases of the operation.
I see. That's great. So could you share with us some pointers on why? Because you mentioned, the capital cost is about $80,000 to build one home, right? And then that's wonderful. And then could you maybe share some ideas why when the government is doing it, it's causing triple or quadruple the cost?
Well, the government layers an extraordinary amount of requirements on top of people that are going to be building housing that's going to be subsidized both in capital and in operations by the government. And that layer, the government is extraordinarily risk averse. And because we, the taxpayers, don't want the government to take risk, which is a ridiculous deal. And so, no risk, no innovation. And that's why you see, people like Elon Musk building rocket ship companies. And it's hard for the government to do what Elon or Jeff Bezos or, Bill Allen or any of these other guys are doing in these highly risky deals that, sometimes rocket ships are going to blow up and kill people. And so in the homeless space, they've oriented almost entirely to this housing first movement as being the sole way that we can mitigate and to build and be subsidized to build a housing first unit. In Texas, it's going to be $250,000 to $300,000 per unit. In California, that's $600,000 to $800,000 a unit. And because we think everybody's got to have a bathroom inside their house, we think everybody's got to have this thing, they got to have this much space, and layer after layer after layer. And next thing you know, our policies have men and women living under the bridges on our street corners. And in effect, that's what the government policies have created.
I totally agree. I also watched your video showing the community first movement adopted 3D printed houses.
Yeah.
That's just amazing.
Yeah.
How can you tell us a little bit about that and how that's going to save you and then the community a lot of money?
Well, honestly, right now, 3D printing is not the answer to affordable housing. They've got a long way to go. It's a beautiful technology. These are brilliant technologists, and they're coming together with some of the largest home builders in the world right now. We're working on another pretty big project with them to do more units. They're going to do it at their expense, so it's not going to cost us anything. So for that, we like it a lot. That makes it very affordable. But there are affordable ways to build housing, and one of those ways is manufactured housing. And we think the most inexpensive way to build housing is to manufacture those inside of a manufacturing facility and deliver those units, on site out here. And but cities don't, want mobile homes, and And so we get forced into building these, like in California, $600,000 to $800,000 per unit deals when we could easily get somebody off the streets for under $100,000. It's crazy.
That's just staggering. I also want to, I know that I'm almost out of time. I'm already out of time, but I want to ask you about how all the men and women in your community, they're not just free riders. They're actually putting their talent into work. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, the number one rule here is you must pay rent. And it turns out that we have very negligible rent collection problems with people. And that always surprises people. But when people pay rent, when they're invested in what it is that they're paying into, they take care of it in a different way. We all do. You know, when you buy your house, you're taking care of it in a different way than when you rent your house. And so, you know, it's you know, a lot of that dignity is building a culture of people caring about their community. They see me walking around. I live in the middle of this community. It's a beautiful place. And they see me bending over and picking up cigarette butts. So guess what happens? The cigarette smokers stop throwing their butts on the ground. Or you get other people that are bending over, picking up the cigarette butts. Or if I see somebody miss their dog pooping in the yard, I reach in my pocket and I've got my bags, you know, that I carry around that because it's my community. And then, you know, so we build this culture of community and, you know, and challenging people to own the community. And it works, not 100%, but a lot.
I think this goes back to what you said about caring, right? So the homeless individuals, or used to be homeless individuals, once they started to care about their environment, about their neighbors, and that can help them rediscover their purpose and meaning. And then I think that's going to motivate them to live a better life.
Yeah. No, I agree, 100%. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. I mean, I know I have so many things that I can just talk with you all day, but you know, I know your time is precious and you have so many important projects on your hand, and I don't want to stop you from doing that. I just want to say thank you so much for speaking with me 2 weeks ago and speaking with me again today. And I just really, really appreciate all you have done.